Most wrong numbers end the same way. An awkward pause. A quick apology. A deleted message that's forgotten in seconds. But every once in a while, a single mistyped digit doesn't just reach the wrong person. It reaches the worst possible one. And when that happens, there's no undo button. No second chance. Only consequences. By the time she realized her ribs were broken, the pain had already spread through her chest like fire. Not sharp. Not sudden. Just deep. Crushing. Relentless. Each breath felt borrowed. Each movement sent another wave of agony rolling through her body. She was locked inside a bathroom she didn't recognize anymore. The door was splintered near the handle. The mirror was cracked down the center. And on the tiled floor, dark drops of blood were slowly drying. She pressed her hand against her side, shaking, trying not to scream. Because he was still in the apartment. And he had promised her something very simple. "If you make a sound," he'd said calmly, "I'll finish it." Her phone lay face down near the sink. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she knew exactly what would happen if she did it wrong. Her fingers were already swelling. Her vision was narrowing. She told herself to stay calm. She told herself she'd survived worse. Then she flipped the phone over and unlocked it. One message. That was all she needed. Just one. In another part of the city, a phone that hadn't buzzed in nearly 3 years suddenly lit up. No contacts saved. No apps installed. No data linked to a name. Just a burner phone, buried in a drawer, kept for a reason most people never knew. The message appeared without warning. And when the man who owned that phone read it, he didn't ask who sent it. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask how she got the number. He read 7 words. "He smashed my ribs. I'm hiding. Please." The room went quiet. Then he stood up. Back in the bathroom, she typed with trembling hands. Her vision blurred as sweat ran down her face. She wasn't thinking clearly anymore. She couldn't afford to. All she knew was that if help didn't come soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. She selected the contact. She typed the message. She hit send. And she waited. Footsteps crossed the apartment floor. Slow. Deliberate. She pressed her palm over her mouth as the handle on the bathroom door twitched. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Silence followed. The kind that makes your ears ring. The kind that convinces you something worse is coming. Her phone vibrated. Just once. A reply. From a number she didn't recognize. From a number she had never seen before in her life. From a number she hadn't meant to text. The message was short. No questions. No confusion. No concern. Just 2 words. Don't move. She stared at the screen, confused. Don't move. That was it. No who are you? No where are you? No call the police. Just a command. And somehow, it was the calmest thing she'd heard all night. Across the city, the man who sent that message was already walking. Already dialing numbers that never went unanswered. Already giving orders that didn't need explanations. His voice was low. Controlled. Lock the streets. Pull the cameras. I want him found before sunrise. No names were spoken. None were necessary. Back in the bathroom, the silence broke again. Not with shouting. Not with threats. But with something worse. A knock. Soft. Almost polite. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that knock. She'd heard it before. She squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for the door to burst open. It didn't. Instead, the footsteps retreated. And for the first time since the night began, something changed. Not relief. Not safety. But momentum. She didn't know who she'd texted. She didn't know what she'd started. She didn't know that the number she mistyped belonged to a man whose name judges avoided saying out loud. A man police reports referred to only as unknown. A man who had buried entire problems without ever touching a weapon himself. All she knew was that somewhere in the city, someone had read her message. And decided to move. What happens when a helpless victim accidentally summons a monster? What happens when the man everyone fears decides, for reasons no one understands, to answer a stranger's cry for help? And what happens next? When the person who broke her ribs realizes he didn't just lose control of the situation. He declared war. This is not a story about justice. It's a story about consequences. And it all began with the wrong number. The city at night is a living organism. Neon lights hum. Sirens wail in the distance. Tires screech on wet asphalt. Somewhere above it all, glass towers reflect a cold, indifferent moon. But down in a narrow, crumbling apartment complex, one small space feels like the epicenter of the world, and the epicenter of fear. Evelyn Vance had never imagined that her life could spiral so quickly into chaos. One moment, she was walking home from her shift at the hospital, carrying a small bag of groceries, humming softly to herself. The next, she was slammed against a wall, pain radiating through her chest like fire. Her ribs were broken, and she couldn't tell if the agony was worse from the physical impact or the knowledge that she was utterly alone. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and mold. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and crawl across the peeling walls. Evelyn's hands shook as she pressed against the door of the small bathroom she had crawled into, desperate for shelter. She wasn't a criminal. She hadn't made any enemies. But that didn't matter tonight. Tonight, the man who had cornered her had no moral compass. Tonight, survival was the only rule. Every breath was a reminder of her vulnerability. Every heartbeat sounded like a drum of warning. She wanted to scream, but the memory of his warning echoed in her head. If you make a sound, I'll finish it. Even through her pain, she remembered his calm voice, the way it carried an almost clinical menace. Calmness in the voice of a predator is worse than yelling. It promises intent. Her phone sat on the edge of the sink. Evelyn stared at it, the glow from the screen illuminating her tear-streaked face. She knew what she had to do, but fear paralyzed her. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The thought of contacting anyone felt like a gamble. Every message she sent could be intercepted, every call overheard. She couldn't risk it, yet she had no choice. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Her brother's number was stored in her phone, but she typed too fast. She was shaking too hard to focus. And that's when it happened, a single wrong digit. The message that should have gone to her family didn't. It went to someone entirely different. Someone dangerous. Someone powerful. She had no idea yet how much her life had just been rewritten by a single, careless slip. She tried to steady her breathing. Her side ached with every inhale. The bruises across her torso throbbed in rhythm with her racing heart. The door handle rattled behind her. She froze. Every instinct screamed that she shouldn't move. Every nerve in her body screamed danger. Yet at the same time, her mind was racing, calculating the odds. Would anyone respond? Would help arrive? Or would this mistake seal her fate? From across the city, the phone she had accidentally contacted buzzed. A number long dormant, a number that had not been used in years, suddenly lit up. Somewhere, someone read her plea without hesitation. They didn't ask who she was. They didn't ask why she needed help. They read, understood, and moved. Back in the bathroom, Evelyn's vision blurred. Sweat mingled with blood along her temples. She pressed her palm to the edge of the sink, bracing herself against the tile. Her body screamed, her mind raced, and yet there was a flicker of hope. Someone was coming. She didn't know who. She didn't know if it was a protector or a predator. She only knew that the balance of power was about to shift. Her thoughts went back to the man who had broken her ribs. He had been violent before, but tonight he had crossed lines that couldn't be undone. Threats had escalated, but she had always believed there would be a line, a limit. Now she understood. He didn't recognize limits. He thrived on control, and the control had just been challenged in a way he couldn't ignore. And that challenge? A simple, mistyped text. The apartment itself seemed to hold its breath. The faucet dripped steadily, each drop marking the slow passage of time, punctuating the tension. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the drama unfolding in the corner of a broken hallway. Inside, Evelyn's world had contracted to the bathroom, the phone, and the shadows beyond the door. For the first time, she realized how fragile life could be. A single misstep. A single wrong number. That was all it took to summon forces she couldn't even imagine. Her ribs throbbed, her fingers quivered, and yet there was a new awareness, a terrible clarity. She was no longer just a victim. She was the catalyst. The spark that had been ignited would soon become a blaze. She forced herself to focus. Every sound mattered. The creak of the floorboards. The faint hum of the building's air system. The distant sirens. Each one could signal safety or doom. She tried to steady her breath, inhaling through her nose, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. She needed to think clearly. She had to survive. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every tick of the clock amplified the tension. The man outside, the one who had promised harm, was still there, unseen. But something had shifted. Something new was in motion. Somewhere across the city, commands were being issued, vehicles mobilized, streets being watched. A predator of an entirely different scale had noticed her plight. The first sign of change came in a subtle way. A vibration against the edge of the sink. Her phone. She grabbed it, her fingers slipping slightly on the blood-slick surface. One new message. She dared not breathe. 2 words. Don't move. The calm authority in those words was almost more terrifying than any threat. She didn't know who had sent them, but the certainty behind the message told her everything she needed to know. This was someone who commanded obedience without explanation. Someone who understood danger. Someone who would act, and act decisively. Her eyes darted around the room. Every shadow now seemed heavier. Every corner could hold a threat or a promise. And in that uncertainty, she felt a paradoxical flicker of hope. If this mysterious figure had moved, had intervened, then there was a chance. A slim, terrifying chance. But hope was a fragile thing. In this apartment, every heartbeat carried the potential for betrayal, every breath could be her last if she acted too soon. The bathroom door handle rattled again. She pressed herself against the far wall, clutching her side. Her vision narrowed, focusing on the small, trembling light of her phone. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she could survive what was coming. She only knew that the wrong number had changed everything. Outside, the city waited. Inside, Evelyn waited. And somewhere in the shadows, the man who had read her message prepared to move. His presence hadn't arrived yet, but the scale of what was about to unfold stretched far beyond the bathroom walls. She was no longer alone. And neither was her enemy. Every sound, every pulse, every decision now carried weight. And for Evelyn, the night had just begun. The apartment held its breath. Every shadow seemed heavier, every corner darker. Evelyn pressed herself against the far wall, clutching her ribs, the pain stabbing with every shallow breath. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, each thump a grim reminder that time was not on her side. The wrong number had been sent. The right person, or perhaps the wrong person, had responded. And now, she had to survive long enough to see what that meant. Outside, the hallway remained eerily silent. Footsteps had vanished moments ago, leaving only the faint hum of the building's electrical systems. The broken handle of the bathroom door still trembled slightly when she touched it, a cruel reminder of how fragile her sanctuary had become. She knew he would be back. He always came back. He always finished what he started. Her fingers hovered over her phone. The words were still there, "Don't move." 2 simple words, but they carried a weight that no plea for help ever could. Calm authority. Implied power. A promise of intervention without explanation. And yet, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was he close? Was he watching? Or was this just another cruel trick, a false hope dangling over her head to toy with her fear? Minutes crawled by. Every drip from the faucet seemed louder than the last. Every distant siren sounded closer. Evelyn's mind began to wander, to imagine the consequences of a single misstep. She thought of him, the man who had smashed her ribs, pacing in the other room, waiting, watching, anticipating her next move. The thought made her stomach churn. Every instinct screamed that he was not just dangerous. He was meticulous, deliberate, and utterly devoid of mercy. And then it began. The first warning sign came as a low vibration against the floorboards. Not from her phone. From somewhere deeper in the apartment. She stiffened, heart skipping a beat. Something was moving. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. The air shifted. A shadow slid along the cracked tiles outside the bathroom. The doorknob twitched. Evelyn froze completely. Every muscle tensed. Her breath became shallow, the pain in her ribs intensifying with every heartbeat. She wanted to call out, but one thought stopped her. The man behind her injuries would kill her if he heard a single sound. Her survival depended on silence. Absolute silence. Somewhere, in the heart of the city, a car engine started. A phone buzzed in a dark apartment 3 blocks away. Commands were given in low, precise tones. Vehicles moved with careful purpose. Men and women, all trained and loyal, obeyed without hesitation. The person who had received her mistyped message was already mobilizing. Every decision calculated. Every step deliberate. The scale of what had just been triggered began to sink in. Evelyn had not just sent a message. She had awakened a force. Back in the bathroom, the rattling returned. She pressed herself into the corner, closing her eyes, trying to slow her breathing. The handle twisted again. A soft cough echoed from the other room. A taunt. A warning. She couldn't tell. Every sound was magnified in the silence. Every movement carried threat. Then, as if in direct response, her phone buzzed once more. She grabbed it with trembling hands. Another message. Still short. Still commanding. Wait. I'm coming. The clarity in that text, the certainty, was almost terrifying. Whoever this was, they did not hesitate. They did not question. They acted. And action, she realized, was what she needed. But she also knew action could provoke retaliation. If her attacker realized someone else was now involved, the danger could escalate exponentially. Evelyn forced herself to focus. Her mind raced, calculating. She pressed her back against the cold tile, trying to remain unseen. She listened. The creak of the floorboards. The hum of the air vent. Every detail mattered. She imagined him pacing in the living room, the man whose brutality had shattered her body and her peace. Each thought of him sharpened her terror, each memory of his calm, controlled violence made her pulse spike. Suddenly, the sound of the front door shifted. Footsteps approached from the hall, slow, deliberate. She pressed her ear to the wall, straining to hear over the pain and fear. The doorknob rattled, then stopped. Silence. And then a faint whisper, a voice she did not recognize, calm, low, almost casual. Leave her be. The moment stretched. Evelyn's chest tightened. Relief and terror mingled, making her head swim. Was this the right person? The wrong person? Could she trust this voice? Or was it another trick, designed to lull her into a false sense of security? She had no time to dwell on it. Her attacker, the man who had broken her ribs, would not wait. He thrived on control. On fear. On certainty. Any hesitation could cost her life. She shifted slightly, testing the strength in her injured body, each movement sending sharp pain through her side. The bathroom door creaked again. Then silence. The tension was unbearable, almost physical. Somewhere in the city, the man who had received her message continued to mobilize. Orders were whispered, relayed, executed. He moved like a ghost, unseen, untraceable. Every street corner monitored. Every escape route covered. He did not need to see her to act. He did not need confirmation. He had seen the message. That was enough. Back in the bathroom, Evelyn's thoughts raced faster than her heartbeat. She considered her options. Stay put and hope the mysterious ally reached her in time? Or risk movement, risk discovery, and risk angering the man behind her pain? Her decision needed to be precise, calculated. Survival required clarity, but fear clouded her judgment. Her phone buzzed again. Another short, commanding text. Do not move. Trust me. She had no choice. She obeyed. Every fiber of her body tensed as she pressed herself into the corner, her eyes darting to every shadow, every darkened crack in the wall. The sound of her own breathing became deafening. She counted silently, willing herself to remain still. Time stretched. The minutes felt like hours. Outside, muffled sounds of movement grew. The low hum of a car engine, the shuffle of feet, a brief static from a walkie-talkie. Someone was approaching. Someone powerful. Someone capable. Then, unexpectedly, a sound from the next room. A whisper. Low. Calculated. Check the perimeter. She's still in there. Evelyn's pulse jumped. Her attacker, unaware of the incoming force, was taking precautionary steps. He had noticed subtle changes. He was cautious, dangerous, meticulous. But he did not yet understand the scale of the threat approaching. A sudden knock at the apartment's front door made her flinch. Not a hard knock, not a threatening one, but enough to make her heart slam against her broken ribs. She pressed herself tighter into the wall, holding her breath. Silence followed. She dared not blink. Then a subtle sound, footsteps receding. Not leaving, not gone, just moving. Calculated. Methodical. The kind of movement that spoke of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who controlled fear as easily as breathing. For the first time since the attack began, Evelyn felt the flicker of hope. She did not understand who had answered her text. She did not know what forces were moving in her favor. But she knew this, the balance of power had shifted. Her attacker, the man who had thought he controlled everything, did not yet realize that the rules had changed. He did not yet know that someone far more dangerous had been summoned. Someone who operated in the shadows, unseen, silent, but unstoppable. The room remained silent. The air thick with tension. Evelyn pressed her fingers to her lips, counting breaths, listening for the smallest sound. Her vision narrowed, her body coiled like a spring ready to snap. She had survived the first wave. But she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The night ahead promised escalation. The danger had not diminished, it had transformed. And somewhere, across the city, her unknown protector was moving closer, unseen but inevitable. Every tick of the clock, every creak of the building, every muted sound became part of a symphony of suspense. Evelyn was caught between fear and hope, trapped in a moment that would define the rest of her life. The city's pulse continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding in a tiny, dimly lit apartment. Outside, lights flickered in the distance. Sirens echoed faintly from the avenues. Somewhere in the shadows, the sound of heavy tires rolling on wet asphalt hinted at movement that had nothing to do with the police. Inside the apartment, Evelyn pressed her back into the corner of the bathroom. Her ribs burned with every breath, and her side throbbed relentlessly, but her focus had sharpened. She wasn't just afraid anymore. She was alert. Calculating. Every creak, every shuffle, every whisper was now a variable in a survival equation she had no choice but to solve. Then it happened, a whisper outside the bathroom door. Not a threat. Not a taunt. But a voice, calm, measured, carrying authority without a single trace of hesitation. She's not alone. Her eyes widened. The air seemed to thicken. Footsteps, light but deliberate, moved across the apartment. She couldn't see him, but she felt the shift in power. Whoever this was, he had already taken control of the space. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to display violence. He simply existed, and the tension in the room shifted. Across the city, vehicles moved with purpose. A black SUV turned corners with precision. A lone man in a dark coat monitored the streets through a cracked windshield. Communications were silent but immediate. Every operator knew their role. Every street corner was being watched. And somewhere, Evelyn's attacker, the man who had smashed her ribs and cornered her earlier, felt the change too. The subtle signs were enough to trigger instinctive caution. His hands lingered near the door handle, hesitating. He sensed that the rules of engagement had shifted. The predator was no longer the sole force in the room. Something larger, something unseen, had entered the game. Her phone buzzed again. One short message. 2 words. Stay put. Simple. Absolute. Unquestionable. Evelyn obeyed. She pressed herself tighter into the corner, closing her eyes. Pain radiated through her chest, but she ignored it. Pain had become background noise. Focus was all that mattered. Then she heard it, a faint click from the hallway. A shadow moved. She could feel it. The apartment, which had been suffocating and silent moments ago, now thrummed with the presence of multiple actors. Each step was precise, deliberate. Each sound had a purpose. She realized with a jolt that the man outside, the one who had thought he controlled her fate, was now being watched. Calculated. Counted. Evelyn's mind raced. She tried to anticipate what would happen next. Would he retreat? Would he strike preemptively? Or had he already realized that the balance of power had shifted in ways he could not yet comprehend? Her phone buzzed again. Another message, equally concise. Don't worry. He won't get far. Her heart skipped. She did not understand the logistics, the force, the scale of the power now intervening. But she understood the message itself. Her safety was no longer entirely in her own hands. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt all night. Hope. The bathroom door handle rattled again. Her attacker tested her resolve. He had not retreated entirely. Every instinct told her that this man thrived on fear, that hesitation was exactly what he would exploit. Evelyn gritted her teeth and remained silent. She had no choice. One wrong sound could undo everything. Footsteps moved closer. Not from the hallway. From inside the living room. Someone else was moving, someone careful, experienced, and controlled. The pattern of motion suggested a man trained not only in violence but in restraint. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, almost elegant in its precision. Then came a low, deliberate knock. Not aggressive. Polite in tone, but impossible to misread. Control in its purest form. Evelyn's pulse raced. She pressed herself against the wall, counting breaths, praying she did not make the slightest mistake. From across the city, the man in the dark coat coordinated the next phase. Every operative knew their assignment. Every path of escape, every potential threat, had been mapped and countered. The city itself became a chessboard. And Evelyn, tiny and injured in the bathroom, was the unexpected pawn that had triggered the opening move. Her attacker paused. The weight of uncertainty hit him first. He had assumed control. Authority, fear, intimidation, all his tools. And now, he felt their fragility. Every decision carried risk he hadn't anticipated. Every footstep outside the bathroom could be met with consequences he could not counter. He had entered a game in which the rules had changed, and for the first time, he did not have the upper hand. Evelyn's vision blurred as tears of pain and fear mixed with adrenaline. She remembered her ribs, the sharp stab of every movement, the echo of his words as he smashed her body. "I'll finish it if you resist." But the voice outside, calm, commanding, unshakable, reminded her that the tides were turning. For the first time since the assault began, she realized she might survive. Then, a subtle noise, a click from the front door. The kind of click that is almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. A lock disengaging. Footsteps in the hallway. Faster now. Purposeful. Each movement calculated to prevent escape, to control every inch of space. Evelyn's body tensed. Her ribs screamed with the pressure, yet she remained perfectly still, coiled like a spring. And then, for the first time, a face appeared in the doorway. Not the man who had attacked her. Not a shadow. But someone else. A tall figure, silhouette outlined against the dim hallway light. Calm. Confident. Danger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He did not speak immediately. He simply assessed the space, the angles, the room. Her phone buzzed again. 2 words. "Trust me." She obeyed. Despite every instinct screaming at her, she obeyed. The attacker, sensing the shift in energy, stepped back. Hesitation replaced aggression. He had assumed he could control the situation entirely. But now, faced with an unknown force, he faltered. Every movement he had mastered, every threat he had wielded, was now countered by someone operating on a level he could not perceive. The shadow in the doorway finally spoke. Low. Calm. Without emotion. "Stay where you are. He won't touch you." No further explanation. No reassurances. No unnecessary words. Just control. Authority. Protection that didn't need justification. And in that moment, Evelyn understood something critical. She was no longer the most vulnerable person in the room. Power had shifted. The predator who had dominated her world was now the one at risk. And the rules had changed. The silence returned, heavy and charged. Every second stretched. Evelyn counted breaths again. Each one brought her closer to the unknown intervention that had begun, that was now unstoppable. And somewhere across the city, the figure behind the messages prepared to move further. Vehicles, operatives, routes, all synchronized. He did not need to rush. He did not need to panic. Control was absolute. Inside the apartment, Evelyn remained frozen, yet a spark of resolve ignited. The next moments would define the rest of the night. One wrong move could end her life. One right move, guided by forces she didn't yet understand, could finally turn the tide. The bathroom door handle rattled again. A shadow crossed the hall. Another subtle knock. And Evelyn waited. The balance of power had changed, but the game was only beginning. The city had never been quieter. Or at least, quieter for those who understood the currents beneath the surface. Lights flickered along empty streets, but somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes monitored every alley, every corner. The forces that had been mobilized moved like ghosts, silent, deliberate, untouchable. And all because of a single, accidental text. Inside the apartment, Evelyn's world had narrowed to the small bathroom, the cracked mirror, and the faint hum of distant traffic. But outside that fragile space, events had escalated far beyond what she could comprehend. The man who had received her mistyped message, the one who had commanded silence and stillness, was not just powerful. He was legendary. His name was rarely spoken aloud. The police whispered it in reports. Journalists only hinted at it in ink-stained columns. And now, he had been summoned, without even knowing her, by the fragile act of a terrified young woman. Her attacker, the man who had shattered her body and dominated her life for the past hour, had begun to sense the shift. The confidence that had once radiated from him like heat was cracking. He tested the bathroom door handle again. It rattled under his hand, but this time he paused, fingers trembling. Subtle movements in the shadows, previously unnoticed, had unsettled him. Every instinct screamed that something far beyond his control was in motion. Evelyn pressed herself harder against the wall, her breathing shallow. Her ribs throbbed with every heartbeat, each one reminding her of her fragility. Yet, despite the pain, her mind worked frantically. Every sound mattered. Every shadow could hide an ally, or a threat. She had survived the first wave of violence, but now she understood, the danger had multiplied. It wasn't just the man in the apartment anymore. It was the forces he had inadvertently summoned. Then the first revelation came. The faint sound of a car door opening. Not just any car, a black SUV, sleek, armored, and unmistakably inconspicuous to the untrained eye. Footsteps moved outside the apartment, synchronized and precise. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but a network of operatives, vehicles, and observers was already surrounding the building. Streets were being blocked, exits monitored, cameras disabled. The city itself had become a chessboard, and she was the queen piece that had just triggered a cascade of moves. Inside, her attacker moved again. He could feel the walls closing in, the silence stretching into tension. He glanced toward the window, toward the hall, toward every potential route of escape. For the first time, he hesitated. Authority and control, once his by default, had slipped through his fingers. The uncertainty was a toxin. The sense of being watched, hunted, made him dangerous, but also vulnerable. And then, the door cracked open. Not violently, not with force, but just enough to allow the shadow of a man to step inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, calm, every movement measured, every step deliberate. Evelyn could not see his face yet, only the silhouette, framed by dim hallway light, radiating power and control. Her phone buzzed again. Another short message. He's under control. Remain still. The clarity in those words, the certainty, was almost more frightening than any physical threat. Whoever this man was, he did not just act. He commanded obedience. Not out of fear, but because his presence alone redefined the rules of the room. Evelyn pressed herself further into the corner, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. She did not move. She did not speak. She could only watch, through a haze of adrenaline and blood, as the unknown man in the doorway assessed the situation. His eyes scanned the apartment, registering every potential threat, every detail, every possible escape route. His mind was a map of control, precision, and inevitability. Then, for the first time, the attacker realized who he was dealing with. He froze, a shiver running through his spine. He had not anticipated this level of dominance, this level of power. And now, cornered, uncertain, he understood that he was no longer in command. "Don't touch her," the man said, his voice low and calm, but unmistakably authoritative. One word, one phrase, and the attacker recoiled. The entire dynamic had shifted. What had begun as a violent struggle within the confines of a single apartment had escalated into a confrontation involving forces far beyond the attacker's comprehension. Evelyn's mind struggled to keep up. She did not fully understand who had intervened or why. But instinct told her that survival was now possible. The shadow in the doorway represented a power she could not challenge, and perhaps should not even fully understand. Her fear remained, but it was tempered now with a fragile glimmer of hope. The attacker moved again, testing the space, desperate for control. Every step he took, however, was countered. Footsteps outside the apartment indicated coordinated surveillance. The city had become a cage around him. He could feel it, even if he could not see it. Every escape route, every ally he might have called upon, had been anticipated and neutralized. Evelyn's phone buzzed again, a single, definitive command. "He will not get away. Stay calm." She obeyed instinctively. Obedience had become survival. And survival, she now realized, depended on trusting someone she had never met, someone she could not yet see. The tension in the room thickened. The attacker's panic grew palpable, subtle, yet undeniable. Every movement was slower, hesitant. Every glance over his shoulder betrayed fear. He had underestimated forces beyond his imagination, and the consequences were immediate. Then, finally, the man in the doorway revealed himself fully. He stepped forward, his face emerging from shadow. Sharp features. Cold, calculating eyes. A presence that radiated authority, control, and lethality. Evelyn's breath caught. She had never seen anyone like him. This was not a police officer. Not a soldier. Not anyone bound by the law. This was someone outside it. Someone the city itself feared. The revelation hit her fully. The wrong number had summoned a figure of legend. A man whose name, whispered in fear across the streets, carried consequences that were absolute. And now, that man was in her apartment. Watching. Protecting. Commanding. Her attacker, realizing the truth, froze entirely. He had assumed he was in control. He had assumed fear and violence could bend her to his will. Now he understood. He had triggered something far beyond him. The power dynamics had reversed completely. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, ribs screaming, tears mingling with sweat. She could not speak. She could not move. All she could do was watch. And in that silence, she understood the scale of what had been unleashed. The predator who had once controlled her fate was now at the mercy of forces he could not comprehend. The man's voice broke the silence again. "Step back. Stay down. You will not leave this apartment alive if you make a mistake." The simplicity of the command, the absolute certainty, carried the weight of inevitability. Every threat, every intimidation tactic, every attempt at violence by her attacker was rendered irrelevant. The balance had shifted. Evelyn was no longer just a victim. She was the focal point of a power she had barely begun to understand. Outside, the city remained unaware of the storm converging on a single apartment. But within those walls, the rules had changed. Fear had shifted sides. The hunter had become the hunted. The hunter had become the hunted. And the consequences of a single accidental text had become irreversible. Evelyn took a deep, ragged breath, allowing herself a momentary reprieve. Her ribs ached, her body trembled, but she could sense it now. The tide had turned. Survival was possible. The attacker's control had ended. The legend she had accidentally summoned was now fully in motion, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night was far from over. But for the first time since the attack began, Evelyn could feel a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. The wrong number had saved her life. And in that revelation, the rules of the game had changed forever. The apartment had transformed. What had once been a cage of fear had become a stage for confrontation, the tension between predator and protector now palpable, almost electric. Every shadow seemed alive. Every sound amplified. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath of Evelyn's echoed in her ears like a drum marking the approach of something inevitable. She pressed herself into the corner, ribs screaming with pain, but her mind was sharper than it had been all night. Her thoughts raced, calculating, evaluating every sound, every subtle movement. The man who had cornered her, the one who had believed absolute control was his by default, now hesitated. Every glance over his shoulder betrayed panic. Every twitch of his hand betrayed fear. And in that fear, Evelyn began to sense something strange. Power, absolute and unyielding, was now on her side. The figure in the doorway moved with calm authority, each step deliberate. He did not speak unnecessarily, did not rush, did not show emotion. Yet every subtle shift of his body, every glance, every micro-expression, communicated dominance. The man who had attacked Evelyn had once ruled this room, but now he sensed the walls closing in. He understood, finally, that he had underestimated forces far beyond his imagination. And then the confrontation began. Not with shouting. Not with weapons. But with strategy. Every micro-movement of the attacker was met with a precise, calculated counter. Doors opened, hallways were secured, exits monitored. The apartment, once the predator's domain, had become a fortress under control of someone far more skilled. Evelyn could feel it in the subtle vibrations in the floor, the deliberate silence that was far louder than any scream. Her mind flashed back to the first moments of the attack, the smashing of her ribs, the cold laughter, the calm menace in his voice. Fear had been her constant companion. But now, it mingled with something she had never felt before, the fragile, almost shocking weight of hope. She realized that she was no longer entirely at the mercy of her attacker. She had been the spark that summoned the storm. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Soft at first, then deliberate. The attacker's panic became evident in every hesitant movement. He had assumed he could intimidate anyone, bend circumstances to his will. Now he understood that the rules had changed. Every strategy he had relied upon, every weapon of fear he had wielded, was nullified by a presence he could neither see fully nor comprehend. Evelyn's phone buzzed. A single message. He will not harm you. Trust me completely. 2 words. Absolute. Controlling. Her body ached, but she obeyed. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every instinct also told her that survival depended on this obedience. She pressed herself tighter into the corner, listening intently as tension built, palpable in the air, electric, almost suffocating. The attacker moved again, testing his options, attempting to regain some semblance of control. Every step he took, however, was carefully countered. Every potential escape, every maneuver, had been anticipated and neutralized. He sensed it. The walls had eyes, the streets had ears, and someone far more dangerous than he imagined was orchestrating every move from beyond the room. Then came the first close encounter. The attacker lunged, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance, to strike fear, to end the game on his terms. But the protector was ready. Calm, precise, and faster than Evelyn could comprehend, he intercepted the movement with a subtle gesture, a presence that required no explanation. The attacker's momentum faltered. His aggression, once sharp and terrifying, now met an invisible wall of authority. Evelyn's chest rose and fell rapidly, pain mingling with adrenaline. She could feel the rhythm of events accelerating. Every micro-action in the apartment, every whispered order, every silent step outside, added to the mounting tension. She knew now that her life hung in the balance not by luck, but by the intervention of a force she could neither see fully nor question. Then came the verbal confrontation. Low, measured, controlled. The voice of the man who had entered her life unknowingly through a mistyped text resonated through the apartment. Enough. This ends now. The attacker froze. Every plan, every threat, every shred of confidence evaporated. The sheer presence of this man, commanding with precision and authority, left no room for resistance. Fear, for the first time, had overtaken aggression. Evelyn watched, her body trembling, as the battle of wills escalated. Her ribs throbbed painfully, each breath a reminder of the physical toll she had endured. Yet emotionally, the tide was turning. She felt a strange empowerment, a realization that she had catalyzed the intervention, that her smallest action, a single mistyped message, had summoned protection she could never have imagined. The attacker, now fully aware of his vulnerability, shifted his focus. Every glance, every tentative step, betrayed uncertainty. He realized he was no longer the hunter. The hunter had become the hunted. And he could feel it. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to retreat, but retreat was not simple. The walls had been reinforced, exits monitored. Escape was no longer an option. Evelyn's mind raced. Fear still gripped her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that someone else had taken control, someone capable of orchestrating events at a level beyond imagination. The tension was almost unbearable, a tight coil of anticipation that threatened to snap at any moment. Then came the final test of dominance. The attacker, desperate and cornered, attempted one last display of control. But the protector's response was instantaneous, decisive, and chilling in its efficiency. The man's authority was absolute. Every threat, every intimidation tactic, every shred of aggression was neutralized. The apartment, once a theater of terror, had been transformed into a controlled arena, where the rules of engagement were dictated by an unseen power that Evelyn could only barely comprehend. Her phone buzzed once more. "You are safe. Don't move until I arrive." Her body ached, but she obeyed. Relief and tension mingled, a cocktail of fear and hope that made every moment feel eternal. She realized that survival, which had seemed impossible hours ago, was now within reach. But it would not be simple. The night was far from over, and the emotional stakes had never been higher. Every second stretched, each one a battle between fear and hope. Evelyn's attacker, now fully aware of his vulnerability, weighed his options desperately. Every step, every breath, every movement had consequences. He had underestimated forces beyond his comprehension, and the consequences were irreversible. Evelyn, pressed against the wall, felt the full emotional weight of the events. Fear, pain, adrenaline, hope, all mingled into a raw, vivid, overwhelming experience. Her ribs screamed, her breath came in ragged bursts, and yet, for the first time, she felt a sense of agency, however fragile. The wrong number had saved her. The unknown protector had arrived. And the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the storm converging on this apartment. Inside, every movement, every whisper, every subtle change carried the weight of life and death. Evelyn's pulse raced as she realized the scale of the forces at play. The predator had lost control. She was no longer merely surviving, she was witnessing the reversal of power, orchestrated by a figure who operated beyond law, fear, or expectation. And yet, the night was far from over. The tension remained, the threat still palpable. Every shadow, every creak, every subtle sound carried meaning. Evelyn pressed herself tighter into the corner, her mind racing, her body trembling, her heart hammering. Survival had become possible, but only if she continued to obey, to trust, to remain still. The emotional peak had arrived. Fear, hope, tension, adrenaline, all coalesced into a single, overwhelming moment. Evelyn realized that the worst had not happened, and yet it had. Her world had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of hours. The wrong number, a simple mistake, had set forces in motion that no one could have predicted. And the lessons of survival, power, and fear were being taught in real time. In that moment, as she waited in silence, ribs aching, breath shallow, eyes wide, Evelyn understood something fundamental. The balance of life and death had shifted. And the person who had arrived, summoned unknowingly, would ensure that the night's events reached their inevitable conclusion. The protector remained calm, authoritative, untouchable. The attacker was cornered, vulnerable, broken psychologically. And Evelyn, trembling, injured, but alive, had just witnessed the turning of a tide she could never have imagined. The emotional peak was complete. The stakes had never been higher. The night's story had reached its crescendo, but the resolution was yet to come. The apartment was silent now, yet the silence was heavy, saturated with the aftermath of events that had unfolded faster than Evelyn could comprehend. The tension that had gripped her ribs, her chest, her entire being for hours now lingered like a tangible presence. Every corner of the room seemed to pulse with what had just occurred, a battle of wills, a clash of power, a confrontation that had redefined control. Evelyn remained pressed against the bathroom wall, her body trembling, her breath shallow, but her mind slowly clearing. Pain shot through her torso with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of the violence she had endured. Yet, beneath that pain, beneath the fear that had dominated her for hours, a fragile relief began to bloom. She was alive. The man who had thought he owned her world was no longer in control. And someone she had never met, summoned by a simple wrong number, had intervened to tip the balance in her favor. The figure who had orchestrated the intervention stepped fully into the apartment now. Calm, commanding, untouchable. He surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing, every detail logged in seconds. The attacker sat on the floor, slumped, hands trembling, panic etched into every line of his face. He had understood too late that fear could be wielded as power in ways he had never imagined. And now, he was powerless. Evelyn dared to take a breath that was not shallow, though it came with pain. She studied the man who had saved her, noting the quiet authority in his movements, the precision in every gesture, the calculated calm in every word. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to show violence. His presence alone commanded order. And for Evelyn, that presence was a lifeline, a tether to safety she had not believed possible just hours ago. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, measured, devoid of unnecessary emotion, yet it carried an undeniable weight of care. Evelyn nodded, tears spilling down her face, mixing with sweat and blood. She could not speak, could not articulate the mix of fear, gratitude, and disbelief coursing through her. But her nod was enough. In that moment, words were irrelevant. Action had spoken louder than any expression could. The attacker, meanwhile, remained slumped on the floor. His attempts at intimidation, control, and dominance had been neutralized completely. He had underestimated the forces now at play, the unseen hands that had cornered him psychologically and physically. His eyes darted around, searching for a route of escape, any leverage, any advantage, but there was none. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Outside the apartment, the city remained unaware of the events unfolding in the dimly lit building. But within those walls, a story of fear, survival, and intervention had reached its conclusion. Evelyn had survived. The predator had been checked. And the wrong number that had sparked this chain of events had ensured her safety. Her phone buzzed once more. One last message. Simple. Absolute. "You are safe now. Don't leave until it's over." Evelyn obeyed instinctively. Survival had become a series of precise actions, of trust placed in the unknown. And now, the final piece of that puzzle had been delivered. The figure who had entered her life in the shadow of danger now began to organize the final resolution. The attacker would be removed from the equation, neutralized in a way that ensured no further threat. Every potential risk had been calculated, every angle covered. The room, once a battlefield of fear and pain, had been transformed into a controlled space of safety and authority. Evelyn's thoughts drifted briefly to the violence she had endured. The broken ribs, the bruises, the terror, all of it had been real. And yet, the way the events had unfolded, the intervention she had never expected, had rewritten the narrative of her survival. Fear had transformed into hope. Helplessness had become agency, however mediated. And gratitude, complex and overwhelming, now mingled with the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The attacker was escorted from the apartment by the silent, commanding presence that had entered hours before. He was no longer a threat, no longer a figure of fear. He would face consequences beyond Evelyn's imagination, consequences designed to ensure that what had occurred would not happen again. The predator's reign, temporary and brutal as it had been, was over. Evelyn finally allowed herself to move, slowly, painfully. She pressed her hand against the wall for support, each step a reminder of the pain in her torso, yet also a testament to her survival. The shadows that had once seemed so threatening now felt less oppressive. The room still held the echoes of terror, but it also held the quiet aftermath of triumph, of resilience, of life preserved against the odds. The figure who had saved her remained calm, observing, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. Evelyn noticed, for the first time fully, the meticulous care in every movement, the quiet authority in every gesture. He had intervened not with chaos or noise, but with precision, timing, and strategy. And in that, Evelyn understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Her phone buzzed one final time. The last message was simple, almost cryptic. "Rest. You are safe. It is done." Relief washed over her, mingling with the lingering adrenaline. She could finally breathe without the paralyzing fear that had dominated her every moment since the attack began. Her ribs still ached, her body was bruised, and the night would leave scars both physical and emotional. But survival had been achieved. The predator had been neutralized, and she had been saved by forces she had barely understood, summoned by a simple mistake that had turned into salvation. Evelyn sat quietly, absorbing the calm. The city beyond her window continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the life-and-death drama that had just concluded within a single apartment. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, she realized something profound. The world could be cruel, violent, and unpredictable, but intervention, precision, and courage, even from the most unexpected source, could rewrite fate. The figure who had saved her prepared to leave. He did not linger unnecessarily. He had accomplished what was required. No theatrics, no celebration. Just order restored, the threat neutralized, and Evelyn alive. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling, weak, but full of gratitude. He nodded once. No words were needed beyond that. Actions, precision, and timing had conveyed far more than language ever could. He exited quietly, leaving behind only the residual sense of control and protection that had ensured her survival. Alone now, Evelyn allowed herself to fully exhale. The storm had passed. The predator who had dominated her life for so brief yet intense a period was gone. The consequences of a simple mistyped message had rippled through the city, mobilizing forces she could barely comprehend and ensuring her survival. Her ribs still ached. Her body still bore the marks of violence. But she had endured. She had survived. And in the silence of the apartment, she realized that even in the darkest, most terrifying moments, hope could arrive from the most unexpected sources. The night had begun with fear, pain, and uncertainty. It ended with relief, survival, and the quiet knowledge that power could shift, even in the face of overwhelming danger. Evelyn's life had been forever changed, not just by the violence she had endured, but by the extraordinary intervention she had never expected. She leaned back against the wall, tears mingling with sweat, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. The apartment was silent now, the threat removed, and the night stretched before her, still dangerous in the city outside, yet impossibly calm in the small space she now claimed as safe. Evelyn had survived. The predator had been neutralized. And the wrong number, a simple mistake, had rewritten the course of her life in ways she would never forget. The night's events would leave scars, yes. But survival, she realized, was a form of victory. And for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to truly feel it.